Heritage Hour of the Filipino Heritage Society of Montreal. The best way that we at Filipino Heritage Society of Montreal preserve our culture is to keep it alive, and in Heritage Hour, we're able to share with all of you. Preserving our Filipino culture is important as this is part of our identity. So for tonight, we have our guest, a second-generation Filipino-Canadian, who is passing his work to our future generation, our children and our grandchildren. Allan Michael Matudio. Welcome, Allan.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Okay, a second-generation Filipino-Canadian born in Montreal, a master's degree holder in engineering, who has gave up his career and became a graphic author to allow him to express his ideas and explore his Filipino heritage through visual storytelling. His book, Kasama, a graphic novel, is an atomy that plays homage to Filipino culture. We have tonight, on my right, Kim Gulcha, our director of outreach program, and on Allan's left is Janet Perignon, our secretary, and on the far end is Rebecca Aguilar, our logistic administrator. So, and I'm Amy Manananggal, Director of Education, and of course, the moderator for tonight's Heritage Hour. So we will start off with a question for you, Allan. As I said, we welcome you. So how did you come about this book, Kasama?
Yeah, to be honest, the project, I didn't necessarily plan to become a comic book artist. I did draw and I do love to write, but Kasama came about with me trying to learn more about my Filipino heritage, as well as just getting connected with the Filipino community here in Montreal. To be honest, it's just one of those things where one thing led to another, and I wanted to share what I've learned with people. And as someone who draws and as someone who writes, the best way for me to communicate what I've learned is by making pictures or writing stories about them. Eventually, I started connecting all these stories together and compiled them and created a narrative with all this work. And yeah, so the Kasama is basically the product of myself volunteering, as well as reading, as well as trying to immerse myself as much as possible to my Filipino-ness.
Very impressed to see a young person like you, Allan, tapping into your Filipino roots and sending a specific message on Filipino culture and customs through your talents and skills in graphic arts. I do a bit of artwork as a hobby using few mediums, the watercolors, charcoal, pastels, and colored pencils. Hence, I can appreciate the creativity, the balance, the colors, and other things that you portray in your work. I have read and looked closely in your recent book, Kasama. It is fascinating work of art using comic style. You clearly conveyed your intended message and your delicate touch on the victim of bullying, foreign workers, and mythology, Manananggal. Now, my question is, in reference to your book, Kasama, what techniques and resources did you use to design and accomplish this book? Were you one of those Marvel Comics kids? And if so, was it through it that you decided to create comic style family?
Hey, so in terms of techniques, it's kind of hard to say because at this point of my artistry, it's very organic, so I don't really have a go-to. But ultimately, I guess to go from the beginning, I studied illustration at a digital art school in downtown, and it was called Sin Studio. There I learned how to approach different types of projects. In fact, I did take a comic book class in that, so I was able to approach this project more procedurally and guess more systematically than just being very feely about it. Like I had a plan of action when it came to that. So really, there's no magic involved. It's really a lot of just hard work and dedication. In terms of resources, I have a huge library of Filipino literature, whether it comes to short stories or just reference material. So I try to dive as much as possible into these different stories, different types of authors of Filipino background, and that helps inform the type of work that I do. You mentioned that I do talk about like migrant workers and questions about bullying, and that's because a lot of what I read do talk about those issues because those are real issues for Filipinos. In terms of myself and my relationship with comic books in general, not just Marvel, I didn't read that much comics in my youth, to be honest. As I mentioned earlier, it was more of an organic project where I was curious about my Filipino heritage, and with that curiosity came a need to communicate what I've learned, and for me, the best way to communicate that was through the comic book medium. I learned to appreciate sequential art, and my goal is not necessarily to make comic books, it's to tell stories.
Good evening. Have you had any personal experience with racism as an artist of Asian origin? How has it influenced your work as a visual artist?
Yeah, in terms of being not just Asian, but also Filipino in this artistic space, I realized that, especially in formal spaces, I always needed to justify why the work is important. In the beginning, especially in the first year, it was easy to promote my work and advertise my work because oftentimes around Filipinos, they would just enjoy that this content exists. So for me, it's kind of a form of, I don't know, passive aggression, just trying to go beyond the Filipino community is that justification of why our stuff is important. We know why our stories are important, but the fact that we need to try to explain why my book needs to be in a library or why my book needs to be in classrooms or why my book needs to be talked about is very draining and is a barrier for being able to share this message to other Filipinos who aren't exposed to our stories.
Hi, Allan. Thank you for being here. Thank you for agreeing to be one of our guests here in Heritage Hour. I'd like to backtrack a little bit, and I have a question about how you grew up. So, how was it like growing up Filipino in Montreal?
Right. Yeah, this is kind of a big kind of question, right? Like it's kind of the origins of basically everything. Well, I guess for context, I was born and raised in Côte-des-Neiges, between Plamondon and Côte-Sainte-Catherine Metro, right? Like Victoria Street. In my youth, I remember going to having my Lola force me to do like dance routines, going to other like community events, going to Megastar to borrow Filipino films. Well, before there was a lot of video rental places. Now I guess there aren't any anymore. So yeah, I'm Côte-des-Neiges born Filipino, and what makes the whole Quebec context very different from other Filipino Canadians is that being a Filipino in Quebec suggests that we've gone through specific experiences, such as just language barrier, for example, is very unique to our people. And needing to translate my school documents to my parents, for example, was also a unique experience that Filipino Quebecers need to deal with. So apart from that, I would say that I lived a very Côte-des-Neiges Filipino lifestyle. But after entering high school, it was a bit different because I went to a private high school and my connection to the community was not as strong.
Okay. I know you did mention in one of their interviews that to know your heritage, because you're sort of disconnected. You went home to the Philippines. Can you share with us that experience you had?
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. It was the first time I went back to the Philippines as an adult. And because of that, I had the liberty to kind of go where we wanted to go, right? When we went as kids, I was always holding my mom's hand and didn't really have a decision in what we would do. But when I went back, it was a mix of staying with family in Quezon City as well as going to very touristic sites. Apart from the very touristic places like Boracay and stuff, like I learned a lot when I went to Cebu City. My dad is very religious, especially my grandma, like they're really into celebrating the Santo Niño. So when I went to Cebu City, I understood why that was, right? I understood the origins of the Santo Niño. I saw the original Santo Niño. So that made everything more real for me as opposed to just accepting why my dad is so religious. Also going back to my dad's family in Quezon City, just seeing their the family relationship over there, like they're kind of, well, they're like 4 families in a small house, and I'm by myself in downtown in a like 3.5, and in my head I'm like, that's so strange because I have all this room and it can feel really lonely, but over there are 4 families in the house. There's just like this different lifestyle and understanding that I need to kind of, that I'm learning, right? So apart from family things, I did go to museums as well, and that's when I found a lot of like fine arts and traditional arts that I wasn't exposed to. So I saw a lot of classic paintings, for example, from Amarsolo, for example, or from I forgot his name, but his last name was Luna. He's one of the original painters, right, who studied in France, and it was amazing to see like beautiful paintings by Filipinos, right? Not just white people drawing Filipinos, but Filipinos drawing beautiful Filipino paintings. Seeing basketry, seeing some of the tattooing, seeing traditional tapestry, it's all beautiful stuff. And if I didn't go back home, I wouldn't have experienced that. Especially the food too, just the accessibility of food and just, it has a more rich flavor to it than unfortunately here. So my life has definitely changed ever since I went to visit the hometown.
Allan, you must be proud to be among the few Canadian Filipino storytellers who enhance their work by their artistic talent. How would you differentiate yourself from them, from the rest of these Canadian Filipino storytellers?
Right. So actually, ever since I published Kasama, I realized that I guess I wasn't the only one. And not only was I not the only one, there's actually a lot more Filipino storytellers than I thought there would be, which is really comforting because in the beginning I thought I was the first and I felt like maybe I needed to create a standard, but that's not true because there are a lot. So I guess I'd like to clarify that there are indeed a lot of Filipino storytellers, and a lot of them are youthful. Like a lot of them are second generation. There are also first generation, but there are a lot more like second generation. It's just, I guess we don't really look for them, or they're not often in the news, or maybe they're not successful, but there are a lot of them. And I'm actually not the first Filipino Montreal comic book artist. The first published Filipino comic book artist, his name is Jay Torres, and he wrote Lola, a ghost story. So he's born and raised in West Island, actually, and right now he's in Toronto. But I was surprised when I found out that, whoa, there's actually another comic book artist from Montreal. And I guess I'm not that surprised because, at least within the Filipino community, comic books is really rich, right? Like, we have a history of comics back home in the Philippines, whether that be Captain Barbel or Darna or just all these funny comics that exist over there. So I'm not surprised that that tradition kind of followed through here in Canada.
What exactly do you mean by transnational trauma within the local community?
So yeah, this is a really big question, but for me, transnational trauma is whatever toxic behavior as a result of setting in a new country. Examples of this is kind of our desire to constantly compare our skills with other people, whether that be with other successful Filipinos or just with white people. I don't feel like we shouldn't need to do that. We all have our own situations in life. We are encouraged to be in healthcare because that was the successful way for the first Filipino migrants to settle in Canada. That's not a reality anymore. Filipinos come and go in various different career paths now. Our obsession with, I guess, whiteness in general, or trying to fit into the Canadian way of living, our need to always be productive, and maybe our fear of authority and the submissiveness of employers as a result of our history being migrant workers. We always want to please our employers. When they abuse us, we just need to take it because we don't want to be sent back home. And unfortunately, that could be passed down from generation to generation, that fear of employers. But really, we do have our worker rights and we are protected. So it's just these kind of problematic ways of thinking that shouldn't exist if you were born here. And hence the whole transnational trauma, because this wouldn't exist if it wasn't for the switch to another country.
I really find it interesting that you are a chemical engineer, you have a master's in chemical engineering, and you had a career in nanotechnology, and now you are a graphic artist, you have a book, you are in a very different field. I've read your book and I love it. I can't wait to read the next one. And so I'm curious about your journey. How did you come from such a serious field into something I think is fun, fun and accessible to a lot of us?
Yeah, I think in terms of that switch from engineering to visual arts, like you can kind of tell already from my technical background that I probably have this way of approaching things, and the way I approach my bachelor's and my scientific career in general is this exact same way as how I approach visual arts. So I can probably explain artistic concepts to people scientifically, for example. Like, everything needs to make sense, everything needs to be clear. When I started studying visual arts, I didn't just do it for fun or as my pastime. I studied 8 hours a day for it, right? I read books about it. I looked at masters. I did research. So I treated it as seriously as I would any chemical engineering course. In fact, I treated it more seriously because of how riskier it felt to change career paths. In terms of how I ultimately got my first job as a video game artist, while I was working in, when I started having a more stable job, I decided to take art classes part-time. And the teacher for the classes said that he would hire the 5 best students of his class into the video game company. So when I heard about that, I was like, oh my God, this is like a chance of a lifetime. I studied really hard to be in this position now, but it felt like a dream to work in video games because, admittedly, I really do love this, right? So I took the class extremely seriously. I spoke to the teacher every day, emailed him every day. I was really annoying, but ultimately, I was chosen to be one of the five, and I got my first job at Warner Brothers Games in downtown. And yeah, it was history from there.
So, Alan, I know you came it late, of your later part of your life, but when you were growing up, I guess, how have you been involved, or what motivation? Because I know your father, so I wonder what really made you from, as Kim was saying, from science to art. But was there when you were small? Was it really within you that you were exposed to some art form of, of experience or activities?
Yeah, it's funny because the whole science thing, I guess, was a result of, it might have been a result of what we were talking about earlier, the whole transnational trauma, because my parents absolutely wanted me to go in a private school, absolutely wanted me to be surrounded by more white friends, or I don't know, just a different type of friends, maybe even separate me from my Filipino friends from elementary school. But like the whole thing about, eventually, once I got my master's, in my head I was like, okay, I did all of this. I'm not exactly happy with what I've accomplished, although like it's obviously great stuff, and I'm for anyone who does have these degrees, like that's great. But for me, like I felt like I was missing something, or I felt like I had to do it, right? So when I actually finished all of this, in my head I was like, oh, maybe I could start drawing more seriously. And yeah, you're right. I did kind of draw in my youth, like I've always been drawing, but I was just doodling. It was never anything serious. I never thought that I can get a job as a video game artist. Like I didn't even know that that industry existed in Montreal. It was only when I started taking it seriously, when I went to school, when I met other people in the industry, that my head was like, oh my God, this is a reality. If they could do it, I could do it. It's just I needed to see people do it, right? I feel like that's kind of what we see in our community right now. We do have a lot of Filipinos working in healthcare, or maybe in factory, or maybe in retail. And because we see a lot of our peers do these types of jobs, we don't have examples of Filipinos doing other things necessarily. So when I met another video game artist, in my head, I'm like, if he could do it, nothing is stopping me from doing it too. Like, this person is not smarter or better than me. Like, I could, if I work hard enough, I could get to that point. And hopefully, with what I'm doing now and the type of exposure I'm getting, like, I could be some kind of like reference for other people when it comes to, you know what, this guy was able to do it. He doesn't seem that smart. I'm smarter than him. I could probably do it too, right? Because admittedly, I'm not the smartest person, but I was able to like achieve what I wanted.
Go for it.
Yeah, exactly. You never know unless you tried, right? Like that's also my mindset. We only have, I don't want to be miserable my whole life. And if art doesn't work, then in my head I was like, okay, then maybe I'll try something else. At least I tried it, right?
Okay, Alan, I know you have lots of work. Can you walk us through your portfolio? And which pieces of artwork are you most proud of, and why? I know this Kasama book is one of them because I really love it. It's so fascinating. The colors that you used there, and the story, and you tied in your experience in the Philippines, the street, the food, and the people sleeping in the same room and all of those things,
Yeah,
and Manananggal, of course. So yeah, tell me, what is the best piece that you think you're very proud of, and why?
Yeah, it's kind of, it's hard to pick because I still feel like I'm at the point where I'm learning. So a lot of my portfolio pieces is just kind of exploration. Even Kasama, Kasama is the product of what I've been learning and seeing if I can make a graphic novel out of it. That being said, Kasama is probably one of the greatest achievements for me personally, because it was basically a year of learning, of immersion, of volunteering, of getting to know different people of the community, and then another year of just working on the graphic novel. So this was extremely, it was extremely long in the sense that, like, I didn't want to rush it because there's so much important elements to get right, you know? Like, I didn't, I tried not to be selfish or not think of money. Like, really, I just wanted to create a good story, because we deserve it. We deserve to create great stories for the next generations.
Agree.
But yeah, so when it comes to writing Kasama, I didn't want it to be very stereotypical. I didn't want it to just be about lumpia, although that's great. I don't want it to be just about very kind of superficial things that the common white people know about our culture. That's why I added like a bit of Cebuano in there. I added a bit of, you know, a bit of like, I added the Capri in there. I added like, I had a scene in the forest, and everything in that forest was native to native to the Philippines. So the plants in there are native to the Philippines. The animals in there are native to the Philippines. Every little bit of detail was researched. So in that sense, Kasama was probably my greatest piece of work. However, if I was going to choose something else, I would choose the story that I wrote about my grandma, because I felt like that reconnected me to my family and how my family got here. And I think you don't need to be an artist to ask this from your Lola or from your Nanay, like, just why are we in Canada? How did we get here? What are the circumstances, right? Like, because for me, by learning about my grandma, I learned about how my mom brought the family here. When I learned about my grandma, I learned about her relationship with my grandpa, who I never met. So it just connected all these different dots for me.
Well, you did mention that about your grandfather, because there's a beautiful anecdote how the story that your grandfather found this bag or an attaché case of a German.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's beautiful. That's a nice story, you know?
Yeah, that's crazy, right? Like, when I tell that to my other Filipino peers here, it's really not the traditional way of Filipinos to get to Canada, right? Like, we didn't, although my mom found an employer to get here, my grandma was able to go to Germany first, which is not a traditional destination, right? She eventually went to Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, which is a lot more expected of Filipinos, but her journey was super different. And yeah, apparently my grandpa at the time was one of like, and I don't know, it might be my grandma really giving my grandpa a beautiful story because, you know,
yeah, dramatize it.
But she made it sound like my lolo was just found this random briefcase and really made an effort to find the person that this briefcase belonged to, and somehow the person who got it back was so generous that he offered my grandpa a favor, and my grandpa consulted with my lola, and my lola was like, "Oh my God, I want to travel the world," right? So, kind of a cute story, and yeah, I'm glad I was able to learn that, because otherwise I wouldn't. I guess, yeah, I wouldn't have guessed.
With your experiences and expertise, how do you evaluate your journey in the artistic world?
It's kind of, I guess at this point, it's only been a year that I've gotten so much exposure, and a lot of it is because of Kasama, right? And what I've learned from this journey is that I think my goal for art is to share information and to bring people closer. It's not really about me elevating my art or getting more attention. Like, it was really about sharing what I've learned and kind of being a storyteller and trying to get the communities together. So I feel like I'm doing well as an artist. The more collaborations I get and the more Filipino artists I meet, because the more these interactions happen, I feel like the more that my work is appreciated or is being validated by other people like me. So for me, the only thing that really matters is, I guess, growing a healthy, supportive, and receptive community, no matter of how they identify as a Filipino.
So I would like to know what will be your theme in your future books.
Right. Actually, I am writing something now that is a bit more personal to me. And it's going to be called Michael. And for those of you who researched, my full name is actually Allan Michael Matudio. And my family calls me Michael. My Lola calls me Michael. My sister calls me Kuya Michael. My mom calls me Michael, obviously. So the next project has more to do. It's not about. It's not fantasy, actually. It's kind of stories of Filipino Montreal stories. It's a compilation of short stories accompanied by drawings that talk about situations that other youth Filipino might have experienced being in Montreal. So I hope that with this work, I address more clearly questions about migration or questions about belonging and identity, and just kind of some of the kind of tough situations you have as a youth. So yeah, I'm really excited to share this. I'm not really, I don't really have a date exactly. I'm still writing and proofreading, but I've been looking forward to share something that's more personal and more grounded. You're gonna see things about Lachine, you're gonna see things about Victoria. So like, I'm looking forward to share something more relatable, I guess.
Alan, who are the artists that have been most influential to you, or writers or authors? Who do you think are the most influential?
Yeah, being an artist myself, it's hard to pick, but if I'm going to be selective in Filipino artists, I compiled a small kind of list in my head. So I'm thinking, one of the first people I'm thinking of is Trinidad Escobar. And she identifies as a Filipinx comic book artist, and she's based in California. And she was my first kind of reference as a really good storyteller, and a very genuine type of storyteller. Like, everything she writes, they write about is about kind of their identity as a Filipina in Canada. Another example is Budgetan and Kajo, who are the creators of Trece, the graphic novel, and right now it's a really big show on Netflix. Of course, people like Amor Solo, who is a traditional painter back in the Philippines. When I see his take on Filipino mythology, in my head, I'm like, oh my God, I'd love to be able to do something like that one day. He doesn't just draw portraits of real people. He also does like he has like this painting of Urduja, or like just mythological situations, which I guess you just don't see as much, at such a high level. Other artists include like musical artists like Looney. Looney, he's like a battle MC, he's a rapper, but when I talk about being immersed in the culture, oftentimes when I'm drawing about Filipino things, I listen to OPM, because it sets the mood, it gives you that energy, it gives you that mindset of, okay, Looney is talking about this, he's talking about Filipino things, and I want to be able to emanate that too, right? Like, it doesn't make sense for me to listen to like, I don't know, another type of artist when I'm working on Filipino things. I really want to be surrounded by this stuff. Like, I don't know if you could see my wall, but like I have a wall and it's all like just Filipino pictures or inspirations or like other Filipino artists in Montreal. And in terms of just people here in Montreal, like I have my friends Deanne and Andy. They are writers, they are poets, and when I read their stuff, like it's just beautiful to hear about Filipino poetry, especially when it comes from Montreal, right? Because it's so close to me. But yeah, the list of influences, like there's quite a lot because I do consume a lot of Filipino Canadian, Filipino American, or just Filipino content overall, you know? I feel like it's kind of my job to be able to know everything that's out there, to be honest.
You were talking about collaborating and collaborations with other Filipinos. And this makes me think about the volunteer work you do with grassroots Filipino organizations. Can you tell us more about that? And what inspired you to be active with these organizations?
Yeah, I briefly touched upon that. In the beginning, it was a lot about trying to get more information for just trying to learn more about my heritage, right? So eventually, I can only do so much with the books that I would order or the research I would do online. Eventually, I did, you know, find organizations in Montreal, right? I got really close to people from like Pinay, Quebec. I met people like Lola Eve or Tita Telma, Tita Tess, and like they're more involved when it comes to like migrant workers or like social justice work. And that's the type of kind of organizing that I was really curious about. So it started off with me just attending these groups and kind of seeing what they were about, and then ultimately I started making, helping them with some presentations or maybe drawing some things for them. Or ultimately, one of the biggest things we did was create this COVID relief project. Well, at the beginning of the pandemic, where we would kind of give relief goods to Filipino migrant workers.
What should the Philippine government and the community do so that our youth will be encouraged to appreciate and develop an artistic attitude on Filipino culture and arts?
That's also super tough. I don't think I'm in a position to talk about what the Philippine government or what the Filipino, people in the Philippines should encourage doing when it comes to Filipino arts and culture. But I think in general, at least people here need to be more informed about, I guess, our arts and our culture. I feel that Filipino arts is often focused on post-Spanish Philippines, and it's often very Luzon-centric. One of my friends was so happy to see Bisaya in my comic because she was like, oh my God, everything I see is usually Tagalog, so when I see Bisaya, it's really warm, right? So I was happy that it could really impact people in that way, to not just be always thinking about like the Tagalog kind of, not just be Tagalog centric, but like there's so many languages or different cultures within Filipinos as well, right? I feel like there's just not enough conversation about, for example, traditional tattoos, or again, tapestry or fashion or basketry. In the Philippines, before the Spanish, we used to have some of the most beautiful jewelry for taken. So there's a lot of art that we don't know as Filipinos unless you research it. I had to buy books about this stuff. Like, I don't even think my mom knew about our traditional culture. Also, it's kind of there's also just learning about trying to encourage our native language, whether that be Tagalog or Bisaya or Ilocano or whatever language you're into. Maybe be curious about traditional Filipino scripts like Babayin. Some Filipinos don't even know that there are Filipino scripts before the Spanish, right? Like,
Yes,
there's
bye-bye.
a huge culture before the Spanish came. And going back with the Spanish, it's a shame that we don't know, like, as Filipinos, we know a lot about Christianity and I guess Islam, depending on where you are. But we also don't know much about just our mythology, right? When it comes to the origins of humans, apparently from bamboo or the rice gods or the Bakunawa or Maria Kiling or Batala, there's so much to talk about. And unfortunately, most Filipinos here don't know anything about that. And the stories could be really beautiful and can be really inspiring. And you can write a whole anthology of Kasama graphic novels with these stories, but unfortunately, we're not aware of them. So I'm not sure how to go about that, how to create, how to encourage more of that. But like, at least myself as an artist, I want to promote a lot of the stuff that might have been forgotten. I don't think we can evolve our art if we don't know our own kind of like pre-colonial history.
What are your thoughts on how people have responded to your work, your artistic work or storytelling? You must have received comments or reviews on that. What are your thoughts on
Yeah,
how they respond?
I think in general, among Filipinos, it's been extremely positive because I am drawing it in a way that is more reflective of what Filipinos could look like. I do see a lot of Filipino artists who draw very white characters as Filipinos, and that's fine because obviously there are different skin tones of Filipinos. But myself, I'm more of a dark-skinned Filipino, so it doesn't make sense for me to draw Filipinos with a sharp nose or very chiseled chin. Like, there are Filipinos like that, but that's not me, and it would feel disingenuous to draw Filipinos that didn't look like me. And a lot of people felt the same in that they would often comment, "Oh, wow, this character has this type of nose, and I don't see that in drawings." Or they have bigger ears, or maybe bigger lips or something. So just to kind of normalize how features that we try to maybe hide as Filipinos or maybe not traditionally proud of, like, I put it out there because that's the reality for some people, and it's nothing to be ashamed of to have like a flat nose or a rounded nose or whatever. Like, I realize that people appreciate that, and they also appreciate just a lot of the small details when it comes to the storytelling. For those who were able to read it, there's like a little part there where I have the family in the bedroom, and inside the bedroom there's a lot of balikbayan boxes. For people who understand what that means, like, that's really touching to them because they, that's a reality for people, right? Like, it's not just a generic house that has random Filipino objects in it. There's storytelling when you put a balikbayan box there, right? It might suggest that some family members are, working abroad, and there might be some family tension somewhere happening. So very small details like that, a lot of people of Filipino origins appreciate. And to be honest, from non-Filipinos, they're just happy to see different types of stories being shared or different visual style be shared because you very rarely see work like this.
Yeah, you even mentioned the fact that the Filipinos there are using those whitening thing because they're not too
Yeah.
proud of being dark skinned, and so they want themselves to be more white, right? In that book,
Mm.
Kasama. Yeah.
Yeah.
I found that
In
interesting.
fact, yeah. Well, to be honest, in my family, we did use like papaya soap, right? Like placenta and stuff. Like, in fact, you can even buy it at the grocery stores here. So I don't I understand people who do that. Myself, like I don't do it. But because I feel like I don't need to, in a lot of my drawings now, I actually make an effort to make their skin darker to further push the idea that it's okay to have darker skin. So I just want to have variety in how Filipinos look because that's the reality, right? Like we come in all different shapes and sizes, and that's totally fine. You're still perfectly Filipino.
Yes. So, so I read your book and I really enjoyed it. I love the name of the let me look at it just to be sure that I got it right. Kuriput Market. I love that name, Kuriput Market. And there's a place within that comic strip that says Ganda Soap. So these. So I really love the local color that you put in your drawings, in your story. I was reading it. I felt like I was in the Philippines. It was, it made me feel warm. It was really nice. And I'm curious about your choice of being. So what I mean by being in Philippine folklore, as you mentioned, there's so many of them, right? So why did you choose the Manananggal?
Right. Yeah, I guess to go back briefly on you mentioning feeling like you were there, a lot of the scenes that I drew are inspired by actual places that inspired me. So the first scene was inspired by Quiapo Market because my dad used to be a vendor there. The neighborhood used to be, the neighborhood Bago Bantay actually is where it's in Quezon City, and that's where my dad's family lives. Elements of the road is reminiscent of when I traveled there, so it's all very familiar to me. And I'm glad that you were able to feel like you were in the Philippines because a lot of it is referenced from actual places. In terms of why I chose specific creatures or mythologies, I guess I was fascinated by the Manananggal and how influential that creature is in Filipino media. Like there's so many horror movies in the Philippines about the Manananggal, and like there's probably the most information about the Manananggal as well, and just the whole. If you break down what Manananggal means, like if you translated that in English, it means to take away or to separate. It's just there's so much symbolism, or there's so much play with what that could mean. So because of that, I felt like the Manananggal kind of had to be one of the first creatures I speak about because it's just the most popular. And for people who aren't familiar with Filipino folklore, I feel like you need to at least know the Manananggal. Among other creatures that I feel like most people should know are probably the capre or the duende or like the tikbalang. Like and I'm hoping to get all of these creatures in the book one day. So for me, it's just this is kind of Filipino folklore basics, and I was lucky that with the Manananggal, I could put so much symbolism into the monster because of its name, and there's just so much more resources when it comes to this creature. Like there are still movies about this, and like there's so many artists doing their own portrayals of the Manananggal. Like this creature is constantly evolving in their identity and what they represent, you know. So
I was wondering, is there a sequel to that? Because the end of the book, this Manananggal has carried Allison up in the air. I was hoping, oh gee, she was there supposed to get rid of this Manananggal, and yet the Manananggal succeeded in carrying her.
I actually, can't talk about a potential sequel yet, but I would love to be able to officially, you know, talk about that or produce that or in whatever way, because I am really passionate about Kasama, the graphic novel. To be honest, it's more a question of sales than anything. And once we reach a certain sales value, then I would get the go to work on another one. And to be honest, it's not that far off. And that's really exciting because it's only been 1 year. So I'm hoping by the end of the year, we can get like really positive numbers when it comes to potentially working on another one.
Good.
Yes, I'd love to see Allison back.
Yeah, that's good, Alan, because Heritage has 2 copies. So I don't want to borrow. I'll buy my own, and then maybe give it to to my son or to whoever, you know. But I do collect some
Sure.
Filipino books that, as you mentioned,
Sure.
about the national store in Philippines, and I have some
Yeah.
collection. I have the Philippine Revolution, you know, things like this. And
Yeah, I'd love to see
speaking-
all of the books, all of your books. I want to go and see which books you guys have and compare, because I have so many and I feel like I can always, you know, learn more. So I wish we can have a Montreal Filipino library for books, because it's hard to find, you know?
Well, Thomas has a very small. People donate books there. So speaking about books, in our gallery we have one of our treasurer, Minda. I think Minda is there because we can ask
I'm here.
some of our administrators who the one questions. So maybe Minda, can you ask, share us some of your question, because Minda has a book.
I know she owes me one. She said she would give
I
me
know.
one, or I would buy one. I've been
Okay.
looking forward to it.
Alan, and the whole box is in my son's basement, so I haven't had the chance to go and pick it up. But as soon as I owe a few people some books, including Kim.
I think I have, remember I helped you out. I have some copies, but yeah.
So, Alan, do you have plans of writing more comic books or storybooks in the future?
I mentioned this earlier, in general, I want to pursue an artistic career in storytelling. So whether that be about talking in terms of the folklore, mythology, our migration stories, or just Filipino experiences here in Quebec, like those are all stories that I really care about. And I'm actually currently working on some of these ones. It's just, it's also a question of getting to it, because there's so much to do. So like my artistic career is focused on Filipino storytelling. So there's definitely more to come. And I'm just really happy of the reception from Kasama, because realistically, it hasn't even been 1 year yet, and I'm getting all these opportunities to work on more or collaborate, or just different Filipino related projects. I feel super blessed and grateful.
So heritage is part of who we are. It has to be shared with us, with the next generation to remember us. So how do we connect with our Filipino culture? If you have heard us for tonight, there are a few that Allan has shared with us. First of all, you have to read a book written by a Filipino. We have to watch Filipino movies. Of course, Allan did it. And we have to attend our cultural activities. And of course, to visit and stay while you are in the Philippines. So knowing our heritage is a great way to find ourselves. Thank you, Allan, for sharing to be a shining light, a piece of your heritage for our Filipino community. I am Amy Manananggal of Heritage Hour. Thank you and good night.